Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Data Strategy Unraveled. I'm your host, Dwayne Browne. So we got an interesting conversation going on around artificial intelligence. We know that the pace of innovation, features, the conversation around agentic, the conversation around investment is fast moving. We know that it's captured our imagination, certainly from a consumer kind of public facing perspective. Um, we're knee deep in making use of these tools. But what I'm seeing in my work day to day and my conversations with customers, I think there's less of a focus on, there's less conversation around what it means for business, what it means for the change and the tremendous opportunity that is presented to business. Especially when you think about the tiny bits of change that they'll need to do, the tiny bits of learning that they'll need to do, the tiny assessments and risks that they need to make before they can scale. And with me today is John Wyllie, CEO of Datasparq, and he runs a startup all in on AI, an AWS partner that is very much at the forefront of helping businesses to make that change. He's in the trenches and he's spending time with us today. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dwayne. Delighted to be here.
Awesome, man. John, before we get all into the mix, and I've got a load of questions, and by the way, thank you for giving me access to your team. And kind of, it really helped me to kind of get going and get into, help me with my research. But I'm conscious that there'll be some who never heard of Datasparq. So you mind kind of walking us through and giving us a bit of an introduction?
Sure, yeah. At Datasparq, we simply exist to help clients figure out where to use AI in their business and where they shouldn't, amongst the hype. And then more importantly, build things that do make a difference and work in the real world. So not a proof of concept that ends up in the failure pile, something that people in their business can use to make a difference.
By the way, you got a great team, right? I think, and I like what I like was they're really experienced. They really know their stuff, right? It's quite octagonal. I found it's like you couldn't do like armies and armies of delivery, and it was really focused on deep thought, creative application of AI. And I found that interesting. But I got three things that I wanted to go through with you. Okay. And that first thing is depth. So I think back to my delivery days and I think, well, I would structure my team 60, 70% was, digging the tunnel, right? The enablement, the mud, getting through the other end. Hopefully you got some people on the other end trying to win the business and actually convince them that there'll be value. And there'll be like 10%, 20% focus on innovation. They'll be focused on spikes. Can we apply this methodology to specific recommenders? And let's evaluate the risk of doing A versus B. And, depending, like different people, no matter who I speak to within Datasparq, it all seems to be flipped. It seems to be that a larger percentage of the engagements that you do, they go deep in research, they go deep in experimentation. There's a larger percentage trying to work out that middle bit. And it's like, well, how can that be? Is it very typical?
I'd say it's more typical than some of the bigger, more mundane projects that a SI will do.
Right.
I think an AI project is one about risk management. You don't want to overcomplicate it and try to push in too much innovation because then you're going to increase its chances of failure.
Right.
And so the balance on any AI project, I always feel, is one of mixing the inspiration with the perspiration. There's still going to be a bit of hard work, a bit of digging through the mud, as you say. We try not to waste a lot of that time on the data cleansing and a lot of the setting up the infrastructure and some of the things the big SIs might spend a lot of time doing. That's where there is increased tooling to help with that. But you do want to make sure that we're adding incremental value to something you could do the traditional way. If we'll be the first to tell our clients, if you can get 80% of the value with a Tableau dashboard and a simple database, just do that. But you do want the AI to be adding some additional impact that you couldn't otherwise do. But you don't want to gold plate things that don't need it, because then you are introducing too much complexity, which is going to add too much risk. And so there is a constant balance of just how much innovation do we push to get the incremental benefits, but without adding too much complexity. Because if you add too much complexity, it's harder to maintain, it might go wrong. And so that's where there's a bit of an art to the work that we do. But I would say on balance, there is a more, there's less of a pyramid in the type of work, because we are, almost by definition, trying to apply new things that haven't been done to make an incremental difference on what otherwise would be done.
So when I hear that, I hear the cost of learning, as you say, risk, the cost to experiment and to really understand. I call it the cost of calibration. So it's like if you had a new car and you don't know how long your new car is, well, if you had to parallel park, you do a lot of braking, right? I always expect, and at least in my mental model, I always expect that it's better for clients to own that cost, because clients will go for much longer working through lots of A/B testing, whereas they actually come to professional services and partners and strategic partners that actually do big heavy lifting. So are you actually going for longer on these engagements and helping customers kind of holding their hand as they experiment and as they learn, or do you take a step back and play more of a coaching role when they kind of adopt different models? That's the kind of bit it was.
Yeah, no, it's a partnership. Almost always, we want to deploy AI to have an impact and add value.
Right.
I think that usually means doing something that's not been done before, certainly for them. Doesn't mean we may not have solved similar problems elsewhere, which gives us a lot more confidence and conviction it can be done. Right. But often the client will be more skeptical because they don't know just how possible it is. And whilst they might be able to see a huge amount of value at stake, they quite don't know how that's going to come about. And there's different parts to that. And that's where I think the innovation, the deployment, the change management, and the risk is twofold. One, there's a technical risk. Do you have the data and the systems to allow this? Is there enough signal in the noise if you're building a machine learning model to give the model enough accuracy and explainability to be useful? So there's a bit of a technical element, and we can do a lot of, it's not our first rodeo. Every project, we know what things to look out for, and we'll pre-mitigate a lot of that before we even put fingers on keyboards and start. Yeah. But the other risk, and this is why you talked about this with the Datasparq team, one of the big functions and core groups of Datasparq is our product team, our design team. Right. Combining data science and design thinking is super important, because the best algorithm in the world will be dead on arrival unless the people in the business can use it as part of their day jobs and use it seamlessly and easily in a way that's helping them make better decisions and run the business more efficiently. Makes sense. So when we build our solutions, not only are we thinking about the technical solution that needs to be built, the data pipelines, the data platform, the algorithms, the analytics, but also thinking about the people in the business that need to use this. So I always talk about Susan and Jeff as two imaginary people working in our business. If we're solving a problem like pricing, well, Susan and Jeff, the commercial managers, what are they going to use?
Yes.
They're not going to write Python on the command line. So I can't give them just a notebook. So I got to give them a tool that allows them to price holidays, right? And allow them to use their judgment such that, that company doesn't feel they're exploiting holidaymakers during a cost of living crisis, even though the algorithm might say you can price this holiday at this location at this extortionate amount. They're like, we could, but our brand, we're not into that. So we're going to dial it down. We're going to tweak this. We'll do this instead. Yes. So that human and machine thing is really important for us. And if you can't build something that Susan and Jeffs will use, then that's the other big potential risk and thing that's important for us to get right. And that's where that collaboration with the client is really important, because again, they haven't done this before. So that's where we have to innovate on the change and the deployment of the new processes and tooling that we might give the Susans and Jeffs so that they can make that stick.
And you touched on something there that it was another question I had for you around apprehension, because so when I do workshops with customers, a lot of times we might end up doing proof of concept, especially if it's public facing, I find that it they leave money on the table, they leave it there, and we're kind of, to understand what was going on, I kind of put myself back on client side, where if you come to me and you said, "Hey, Dwayne, we're gonna do this really complex thing. It's gonna have this amount of value. We run a proof of concept, and let's scale it out to 1% of like your typical audience." I'd be nervous because I wouldn't be able to necessarily guarantee that there's some permutation of result out in the world somewhere that would have something that was unexpected for me. I would want to go through the process of calibrating a little bit longer to build confidence. But you just nailed it there, right? In that, by engaging with me first and addressing that concern, and perhaps then putting like the gates in order for me to build confidence with it, then when I get to the end and I do hit the kind of green button to launch canary release, then I don't feel as uncomfortable.
That's absolutely right. There's part of the process, not just during development, but in deployment as well. It's incremental, it's collaborative, it's iterative. You prove something before improving it.
Yeah.
So that's the same when you're building the model in the first place. Let's take pricing.
Yeah.
A pricing algorithm to price holidays or car parking spaces. Anything that's can be dynamic. First of all, when you're building the model, you'll be testing that iteratively and validating it with the client's internal commercial team to make sure it's sensible.
Yes.
But then there's also an iterative deployment for it to be used. You suddenly don't switch your website and one day it's using the pricing ladders in a spreadsheet that the commercial team use, and the next day it's using this RL model for all of your prices. When we've done this with the clients, the first step in deployment might simply be, right, now do some tests. Here are your old pricing ladders. Let's do some A/B tests.
Yeah.
Just tweak your pricing ladders manually based on the prices our model is giving you. So our model is nowhere near plugged into your website's API, but it's giving you a one-off set of new prices to test them in a way that's fair and responsive. And then once they've done that, then you might think, right, now the next phase, once you're comfortable with those tests, let's roll maybe those out to a wider audience and just have some new pricing ladders. Then you might say, right, well, the next part of the process is let's update these prices now on a weekly, daily basis, but still have a human in the loop.
Yeah.
So every day the algorithm's giving you a spreadsheet saying, we recommend you put these prices up and these prices down. And here's why.
Yeah.
The commercial team can look at it and think, yeah, that makes sense. I don't believe that one. We've got Ramadan coming up. The model doesn't know about that. So I'm just going to adjust it. I think that's going to be too aggressive. I don't want to end up in the headlines for the wrong reasons. So I'm going to adjust that price. Yeah. And so you then go through that phase of sort of enough human in the loop to give them confidence. And, they still have their hands on the steering wheel. And then before you go fully autonomous, you go through some iterations of that. And then when the confidence builds, you're like, okay, well, actually, for these regions, for these things, we trust the model.
Right.
You will still have the guardrails and technical monitoring in place, but the human in the loop can start stepping back. So again, that whole process of, first of all, where can the human in the loop be at the beginning, at the end? What's the transition path as they take their hands off the steering wheel? Again, that's another design process that's really important, and figuring out how Susan and Jeff's roles will change.
Yeah.
At the beginning, Susan and role in a pricing team, Susan and Jeff, they're responsible for writing the prices in the pricing ladders.
Yes.
But that will evolve where Susan and Jeff then become the guardians of the rules and the guardrails that govern the algorithm that's putting the prices into those pricing ladders. So you've got to figure out how to take Susan and Jeff on that journey.
Well, because you used to work in creative agencies like back in the day, right? So you would have, because a lot of what you describe, it sounds like, it isn't that different from like optimization in that sense, where it was very, very much digital. You kind of like, do multivariate testing. We brought as many people into the process as possible, and we gamified it in a way, right? So people had a sense of ownership and buy-in. So by the time we got to the end of that process, then they trusted the results, and it sounds like a similar kind of approach. Right?
Very much so. I think I've, to some extent, founded Datasparq on all of the best things that I saw in my sort of previous employers and previous professional services businesses. So yes, you're right. In the agency world, where there's very much a design-led, creative-led, user experience-led approach, and then subsequently at the Accenture world, which is deliver things at scale with the machine, and then more recently at McKinsey Quantum Black, whereas let's really focus on the high-value stuff where a real impact can be had. But that agency thinking, that design thinking, is super important to combine with the data science thinking, I think, because I don't believe AI is not yet fully autonomous, general intelligent agents that can do everything.
Yeah.
They're very good at solving a subset of some problems.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, humans are also very good at solving other parts and other problems. And so for us, it's all about getting the best of both. How do you get the best of the compute power, the algorithmic benefits of AI, but also the empathy, the judgment, the other important knowledge that the humans in the process will have that is going to be increasingly difficult for the algorithm to incorporate and capture all the time.
You speak to different teams, and one thing that's become very clear is that there is a high degree of creativity in actually applying a methodology. So like, when you decide that you're going to do vehicle, routing, or when you're going to do traveling salesperson or coinciding similarities, who's making that decision though, of like, what methodology should be applied to solve a particular, because sometimes it's kind of like disparate mathematical, kind of old school algorithms that you're applying to a business problem. So who's actually making that decision?
Yeah, I mean, that'll sit across the different groups at Datasparq. I mean, we're fundamentally made up of 4 different food groups.
Right.
There's our strategists who help figure out where you should and shouldn't be using AI in a business, because AI can be used everywhere, but just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
There's our software engineers who will build the robust, resilient solutions to make this thing work in the real world and be responsible, supportable, robust as they scale, and not fall over on a Wednesday lunchtime. There'll be our data scientists who'll be figuring out, well, what are the right algorithmic techniques should we use to solve this problem? Actually, is it more of do we frame it as an optimization problem, or is it more of a forecasting problem, or a combination of the two? And then there's our product designers that are thinking about that human-machine interface. And so to understand exactly how you solve a particular problem, it's a combination of all of those 4 people with our client. Because within solving any problem, there will always be a bronze version, which is just doing something slightly clever with maybe a little bit of data and nudging the business user in the right way through a Tableau dashboard. And there might be a gold version, which is much more complicated. And it's going to be a judgment call as to what's the appropriate right-sized solution to fix that problem to give us the maximal incremental benefit based on the investment complexity required.
But do you get impacted by the hype, and that, in such a way that it kind of flips the dynamic, in that this is something that I feel day on day, week on week, where customers think, well, I got to apply AI to my business. I've got big expectations in terms of the gains that it could bring to a particular area. And then they might be slightly disappointed when we then encourage them to actually take a small slice and start with the small amount of value and then scale it out. The idea of 101% doesn't match their mental model in terms of what they heard, that they promised that they heard.
No, but it's not necessarily the kind of Dave Brailsford marginal gains, 101%. It's almost the other way around. It's not starting with, I want to deploy AI in my business. We see a lot of that. Yeah. And our first question will be, well, why do you even need it? Right. It's starting with, what's the biggest, most high-value problem in your business? Right. And right now, in the current cost of living crisis, wages are going up, especially in businesses with operational complexity, lots of staff. They're just looking for more efficiencies. So you speak to business leaders, and their biggest problems are, how can I deliver more with less? How can I do things faster? How can I increase quality? How can I increase top line? And so we start with those big problems. Then we look at, right, well, which of these could be addressed by AI? Because those sorts of problems, improved speed and automation, naturally well suited to AI, improved efficiencies, naturally well suited. But again, then it's like, well, what's the right AI solution? And that's why a lot of problems actually, we end up using more traditional, say that they're not that old, but like operations research techniques rather than the latest GenAI techniques. A business leader's problem is, how can I do more with less? Optimization is all about squeezing the most out of your assets.
Yes.
Most businesses only have so many staff, so many vehicles, so many warehouses, so much square footage, so much product. You can't just have infinite breadth and depth of every product.
That's right.
Even Amazon, with all the probably one of the biggest warehouses and supply chains in the world, can't have all of everything at every one time.
That's right.
Can't get everything to where it needs to be immediately. But it's those sorts of optimization problems we find in different flavors. Doing more with what you've got are the business leaders' problems. And it's not, and even if you make a 1% improvement to the biggest problem, it's still hugely impactful.
Yes.
And can impact revenue and margin. So you're right, we don't start with, where can I use GenAI in this business? It's, what are your biggest problems? Because even a 1% improvement on your biggest problem is going to be significant. Right, now, can AI move the needle? And in a lot of cases, it can be some of the optimization techniques rather than the latest GenAI techniques.
Go back 12, 15 years, and you were a kind of similar kind of a point in the adoption curve. So you had, big data. It was right size. You had, businesses feeling more comfortable with it not being their, core competency, outsourcing it to agencies, right? And the size was a huge bit of work. But what that meant was there was a specific type of customer that got the best out of agencies. They knew how to massage and, do the political sequencing on their side. They know how to ask us the right questions and challenge us in the right way. So is there ideal setup of a customer or a sponsor that gets the best out of Datasparq, you'd say? Or
Yeah, I think you said it right there. It's the same type of person. The people who are asking the right questions. We see, we have a mix of customers, and the starting point is quite different in two fronts. The starting point can be quite different just with regards to the technical capability they might have today, whether they're doing a bit of data, a bit of AI, or a lot of AI.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. They're just somewhere else on that journey. But the other starting point that's different is the level of questions they're asking. There are some who are getting a lot of pressure from the board or investors who don't know much about AI, but see this AI arms race going on and are saying, we need to have AI as part of our enterprise valuation story. How are we using AI?
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of C-suite getting pressured from the board saying, how is AI part of our story? That in turn can lead to some of the C-suite saying, we need to be using AI. And putting the AI sticker on everything. They'll come to us and say, John, we need to be AI-led. We need to be using external data. I want, they're like kids in a sweet shop. I want 2 kilograms of external data. I want 3 kilograms of data science and 4 kilograms of GenAI, please, and I want it tomorrow. I'm like, well, hang on. We could go and do 1,000 things and deploy AI all across your business.
Yeah.
But it probably isn't maybe going to that approach isn't going to have the impact your actual board members and investors want.
Yeah.
So before we rush into it, let's have a look at the big ticket items and then just be a bit more selective around where we can apply AI.
Right.
I've seen this recently. There was a press release earlier this week. Wall Street Journal, Johnson & Johnson have just rode right back on all of their sprinkle 100 flowers of AI and see what works, because it just creates chaos, it creates distraction. And they're now saying we're going to focus on 2 or 3 high-value, high-impact initiatives. That's always been our approach. AI, despite all the tooling out there, still isn't just a roll it out, it's done. An AI solution is a bit like a puppy for Christmas. You've got to feed it, water it, look after it, monitor it, make sure it doesn't start underperforming and giving you the wrong results. And so You got to only deploy these things where it is going to make that difference.
Something you said that just really hit home for me. I think that optimization isn't a glamorous business, because you know the value is all buried. So, well, first how you find it, and then when you find it, there's all of the stuff that we're talking about. Kind of the risk, mitigating the risk, building, learning, experimenting, and then you kind of brave enough, then you can scale it. There's quite a few steps that you need to go through before you can decide to scale. And I always got a beady eye when when I see people kind of subscribing to the myth that they can just throw everything out. And yes, there will be some businesses, mainly digital native businesses, that are brave enough to go all in AI first, and kind of like throw the ties out the pram and just say, let's start new. But I think there'll be a larger percentage of businesses in the long tail that will go, okay, all right, I got 100 years of operating. I've got tens of thousands of staff members and operations and connections between teams and partnerships. All right. And I need someone who, like yourself, to come and go, all right, where do we start? So like, for me, there's that myth that comes from the hype. That I think that's what you just mentioned, right? You kind of like this,
Exactly. And it's just helping be a bit authentic and saying what AI is good and what it's not good at, and educating that audience a little,
Yes.
And educating them that AI is not just GenAI. As I say, you mentioned optimization. That was popular in the 50s, and operations research was a thing before it fell out of fashion and something else came along.
Yeah.
But actually, some of the biggest successes we've had are in the field of operations research and optimization.
Yeah.
Probably on the other side of the AI spectrum to GenAI. It's got nothing to do with LLMs. It's got a whole host of different technologies. There's different ways to get those OR techniques to run and scale and be effective in the cloud. But as I said earlier, in the real world, most problems and most C-suite priorities are doing more with what they've got.
Yeah.
And that often is an optimization problem. So a good example is our work with GXO, one of the world's biggest third-party logistics companies.
Yes.
They run all of the vehicle routing and fleet for a lot of UK and global supermarkets. In the UK, one of the supermarkets they work with is Iceland.
Right.
And together, working with GXO in Iceland, we've optimized the routing of all of their vehicles from depot to store. So as you can imagine, supermarkets need to be refilled with products on a regular basis. And they cover many, many thousands of miles each year doing that. And with the price of fuel and with sort of lack of HGV drivers, if you can shorten those miles driven, then you make significant savings and significant positive impact on the carbon footprint if you can drive fewer miles. And GXO in Iceland have had great teams optimizing these routes for years because it's in their interest. It's a big problem to make this as efficient as possible. But they were innovative enough to say, we think we can do even better here. And we worked with them and actually deployed some optimization techniques that aren't themselves particularly new. The theory has been around for a while, but they're not just algorithms you can download from Stack Overflow and in a Python library and deploy quite easily.
Yeah.
But so taking some of that theory, developing that into a cloud native way to run it efficiently. These problems are so huge, just throwing all of Amazon's EC2 instances at it. You can't look at every possible route and solve it by brute force. I think the stat is if you have just one vehicle in 62 locations, there are more permutations for that vehicle to visit in different orders than there are atoms in the observable universe. So if I'm Iceland with a fleet of over 600 vehicles delivering to over 1,000 stores, this problem is computationally far too big. But you need some clever heuristic algorithms to identify those better solutions quickly. But you also, again, coming back to Susan and Jeff, well, Susan and Jeff need a schedule by 6 o'clock in the morning.
So you're integrating it into the systems that they already use.
Exactly. Again, the best algorithm in the world is going to be dead in the water unless Susan and Jeff can use it. But that creates other practical challenges, right? Because I may want to use the latest technique, but I'm not going to save 50 grand in diesel costs if it means I have to spend 40 grand on EC2 compute, and it still takes me 2 days to run the algorithm because I don't have 2 days to run the algorithm. My store orders only come in at close at 8 p.m. and I need to figure out a schedule by 6 a.m. the next morning. So I need an algorithm that runs quickly. That doesn't burn up all my cloud compute budget. And so you've got to compromise a lot of these things. Again, and this is all part of what's the gold, silver, bronze solution to get something that allows Susan and Jeff to send vehicles out on routes that are shorter and much cheaper. But we find, those optimization problems are really fertile ground because, I say, those class of problems is quite high on most C-suite's agendas. They're ones well suited to AI. And that's where some innovations, say, on the other side of the spectrum from GenAI can really have an impact. And they're particularly relevant, I think, to those businesses with lots of operational complexity.
Does this theme around pragmatic AI strategy that everyone points to you to say, hey, when you get on the show, talk to John, ask John around, pragmatic AI strategy and that it means. So you mind shedding a bit of light on that?
Yeah, it's flattering to hear you hearing that reputation. I'd like to think it just plays to the authentic nature of the people we have in our business and that combination of data science and design thinking. For us to make it practical, it's all about how do I make Susan and Jeff's lives better?
Right.
I keep talking about Susan and Jeff. I'd love to meet them one day. But I say that for these problems, you need good data science. You need to solve the actual data problem at heart.
Yeah.
But as I said, unless it can be used by the right people in the right way to have the value, then it's pointless. Yes. The best data science in the world is not worth it if it's going to get adopted. So one of the key things that our strategy team really lead with is that user experience thinking. And actually, our strategy team is led by someone who I worked with in our agency days, who really believes in the importance of that combination of design and data science, that user experience, because we almost start with the high-value business problems and then think, what's the operational change that needs to happen to make that better? If my biggest problem is, and one of the biggest costs I have in my business is my fleet and delivery costs, let me speak to the people who run that operation. How do they work today? Because most people want to do a 9 to 5. They don't want, and in these operational roles, they're already dealing with 100 fires each day. Drivers called in sick. A truck's got a puncture. So we don't want to make their lives more complicated. We need to make it as easy for them as possible. So part of our AI strategy is, looking at where are the biggest high-value problems that the C-suite worry about, but turning those ideas. We see so many strategies done by some of my previous employers and some of the big four where the AI use cases are no more than ideas. We're going to use AI to improve customer retention. Well, tell me how. We're going to use AI to reduce our fuel costs. Well, how exactly? We take those ideas and we have quite a high bar for, what is the data and AI product we give to the Susans and Jeffs? Who are the Susans and Jeffs? Which part of the process are we interjecting the AI tooling into their world? How are we getting the best of Susan and Jeff's intuition and knowledge and years of experience and supercharging that with AI? So I think the key bit that makes our AI strategies executable, practical, gives you a clear step of what to do now, what to do next, and what not to do for the time being, is because we're really thinking about the value, where to start, 2, the users and what they need, and what the challenge is in getting them to adopt and use it. And then 3, just as a result of that, the technical investment worth making. Do you actually need the bronze, the silver, or the gold version? Because that's important. If you misjudge that, you build something that doesn't quite land and have the impact it ought to have. If you get it wrong or you're overambitious, you might bite off more than you can chew, and you never end up building anything that's too complex, and you don't put anything in the hands of Susan and Jeff to make a difference. So that's where I think some of our experience in pitching the gold, silver, bronze piece is important.
So John, you're being very generous with your time. I really appreciate you doing that. So we earlier made a comparison in adoption curves for analytics and big data to know. And I think we're a little bit ahead, right? And this adoption curve is going significantly faster. I think we all know that. The pieces of work right now are bite-sized because there's a cost to learn. We're kind of focusing on learn, we're focusing on risk. I see that very quickly accelerating to be more complex as, businesses, practitioners become more confident, more skilled. The size of the change will be bigger. So do you see Datasparq playing an increasing role in those complex programs of work? To me, I compare it to when the agencies handed over to the SIs from a digital transformation, digital build perspective back in the day, right? So where are you with that? Where do you see Datasparq kind of playing as you kind of really ramp up when things get a bit more complex? And
so today, to some extent, we play in both spaces where there's a large, I'd say the larger group of customers that we work with don't have the breadth and depth of skills to build and run these tools.
Yeah.
Right. It's still a fairly new thing. There's lots of people out there claiming to be data scientists and doing all this, and there are lots, and some are better than others. But there's still generally a lack of people who are really experienced and capable of doing this. Not just building something, but building it in a way that's robust and is going to work in the real world. And let's say if you're using AI to do something, it's probably only worth it if it's mission critical. So when you do build something to get beyond the pilot purgatory, it needs to be robust.
Yeah.
And there's probably a smaller subset of people in this space that can do that. But it's important for our clients that they have those people one day. But most of our clients probably don't have the internal skill sets at the breadth and depth of scale to build and run a lot of these AI solutions. So given that's our core business, for a lot of our customers, we run these solutions for them.
Yes.
For as long as they need. And a lot of them, we're then actually helping our clients build and recruit their own capability to start doing this themselves.
Makes sense.
And again, that's another thing our strategy team work with, is helping our clients understand, here are all the applications for AI to make an impact in your business. We can make all these happen. Here's what it'll look like when they're all now in existence. How are you going to evolve them, take advantage of the latest innovations, keep them performing, keep them improving? Right now, we can offer that as a service for our customers, and we do. We've got customers we've been running and improving the models for solving the same problem and improving it over the last 5 years. There are others where for the first 2 or 3 years, we've been running it for them, but at the same time, helping them build up their own capability, bring people into their data team, teaching them about MLOps,
Nice.
and then over maybe 2 to 3 years, transferring that capability internally. And now then they can start evolving it and building on their new things. So I think right now, the volume of clients that's got the ambition, the appetite, the headspace to build that capability and that muscle memory today still isn't huge, but I expect that to grow increasingly. We're seeing the clients' aspiration to own this one day increasing.
Yeah.
I think a few years ago, they might have just thought, we're a logistics business. AI is not our core competency. You do it.
Yeah.
But now some of those businesses are saying, whilst it might be be our core competency, it's increasingly fundamental to some of the core operations of our business. We should start bringing some of this in-house. So the aspiration is there. They're not yet necessarily doing it, but I think there's more appetite, and we're now probably finding ourselves helping our clients think, well, what should your AI teams and your data teams be capable of now, but also what do they need to be capable of tomorrow, and helping them paint that picture and get there.
Nice. John, thanks for your time today, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
It's been delightful.
Cool.
Good to see you. Thanks, Dwayne.